but on this speech, on this night, I talk about DNA and Jewish genealogy. I've been interested in genealogy since I was a boy. In 1965, 2 months before my bar mitzvah, my grandmother died. We went to the cemetery for the burial, and at the end of the ceremony, my father took my hand and led me off into the cemetery in one direction. My mother took my brother's hand and led him off in a different direction. And I grew up without any first cousins living in my hometown, with just one grandparent in my hometown. And I found out at the end of that burial ceremony that I had lots of relatives in Omaha, Nebraska, except that all of them were in the cemetery. And I had lots of relatives in Omaha, Nebraska. We've had relatives. My parents were both born in Omaha, Nebraska. I have one grandparent that was born in the United States. And most of the relatives came to this little place, the shtetl in the middle of American Siberia in the 1890s and early 1900s. So I had a lot of relatives there, but I didn't have a lot of close relatives. And as I said, I didn't have many relatives who were alive. Well, that evening, when everyone came to the house, I was the little kid, just almost 13 years old, and I was walking around to all the relatives, asking them, where did their parents, where did their grandparents come from? Tell me about your parents and your grandparents and your uncles and aunts, and who do you remember? And so I drew my first family tree that night in 1965, and since that time I've picked up and put down and picked up and put down my genealogy many times over the next 20 or 30 years, and ultimately I've always put it down because I hit a paper trail roadblock. So what we're going to talk about tonight is my personal discovery, what one can do with DNA. DNA, think of it this way, DNA is the history book that's written into all of your cells, and only now, in the beginning of the 21st century, is science learning how to read that history book. Now, we also have the medical book written into our cells. We even know less about that than we do about the history book that's written into our cells, but certainly over the next few generations, all of that is going to be decoded, or it's going to be more decoded, and that's the promise of personal medicine and yourself. What we're talking about is personalizing your DNA and your personal story, because everyone here is different. Every man in this room has a different origin. Unless you know that you're related, you have a different origin. The men probably hail back from the Levant, probably from the Middle East. On our mother's side, only about half of us actually descend from a woman who left Judea 2,000 years ago in the diaspora following our unfortunate loss to the Roman Empire. So let me go through this with you. Traditional genetic genealogy focused on the direct male line. It's the Y chromosome that goes from a man to his son. The son passes it on to his son, and that son passes it on to his son. And so the Y chromosome does not recombine with anything. Therefore, every one of the men in this room who have a brother, they have a brother who has a Y chromosome that's the same. The reason it's the same is that you both got it from your fathers. That means that a male cousin of yours on your father's side should have identical or near identical DNA as you do. So we don't dig up anybody or any of this silly stuff that that people might theorize when we're doing genetic genealogy. If 6 generations ago your father's 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 father was a famous rabbi, then he passed his Y chromosome to his son, who passed it 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 to you. And therefore, I could get the Y chromosome of your great-great-great-great-grandfather by testing. I can get this man's Y chromosome by testing you today, or by testing your father, or by testing your brother. Women, I can test your brothers and obtain that same piece of information. It also goes through on the direct female line. Everyone has mitochondria, which comes from their mom. Men and women both have mitochondria coming from the mother. So my sister, if I had a sister, and I